Once known as an underdog that clashed with the Goliaths known as Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks and later Illumination, creating memorable experiences such as Rio and Ice Age in the process, Blue Sky Studios' rise to prominence was one that defined the ages, a tale of the underdog competing against these massive corporate franchises and managing to edge them out when it comes to box office hits as well as overall popularity. From pioneering in certain parts of animation as well as exploring new concepts and worlds that other studios hadn't even conceived of at the time, all the way to a repetitive franchise that was used as a cash cow all the way until the studio's inevitable demise, Blue Sky Studios certainly had a rocky course throughout most of its history. Some, to this day, wonder how the demise of Blue Sky Studios came to be in the first place. At one point, this underdog was battling with the titans of the animation industry, seemed to be unstoppable up until poor management and a mix of destiny foretelling financial decisions would bring the studio into the fold of the Walt Disney Corporation's assortment of animation studios. But how did we get here? How did the beloved studio known for Ice Age and Rio kneel to such low levels? Today we're exploring the turbulent tale of Blue Sky Studios, what brought them into the household and what inevitably exiled them from the minds of many, and we begin that tale within. Our story begins all the way back in February 1987, which is when Blue Sky Studios was founded by a multitude of individuals after their parent company, Margie, known for creating Tron and for being an early pioneer in the form of nuclear simulation as well as special effects, shut down. Back before Blue Sky Studios became a household name beloved by many, they spent their time creating special effects for commercials, TV shows as well as short films. I find it somewhat amazing how, to an extent, Blue Sky Studios was initially founded to more or less visualize nuclear simulations. I find that background in science and special effects somewhat cool, especially when you look upon what became of the studio during their later rise to prominence. Anyways, one of the first known commissions was for a company which wished for its logo to be animated with it floating over a lake with the water and sunset visible. Think Rovio's logo in the second Angry Birds movie in the intro, but in the late 80s. Their struggle from the very beginning was highlighted thanks to the fact they needed the assistance of another computing company to complete the rendering of this logo, something that would go on to foreshadow the many struggles that Blue Sky Studio would endure later into its lifespan. Thankfully, their abilities to animate and their reputation began to improve in the 90s, but then producing many special effects for commercials which were notoriously known inside of American households. The first notable commission during the 90s was for the United States Marine Corps, who worked with Blue Sky Studios to produce a multitude of recruitment commercials during the early 90s. I also find this relatively funny when looking back. They've had affiliations with nuclear simulations and visualizations, and now they're creating commercials for the Marines. If anything, it really does feel like during the early 80s and 90s, Blue Sky Studios was more or less going on optional side quests before it found success later down the line. I know some studios have strange origin stories to say the very least, DreamWorks being the best example of a petty revenge story considering it was founded by someone who's disgruntled by Disney limiting their creative freedom, but I think this title of strangest of studio origin has to go to Blue Sky Studios, especially considering what they used to do back before they became a household name. Adding on to this though, they're also notorious for producing one of the first animations for Nicktoons, which features an orange character creating a dinosaur, a dolphin, and later evolving to become a walking person. However, the largest success during their humble beginnings would come in the form of a subsidiary of 20th Century Fox acquiring a stake in Blue Sky Studios, briefly renaming it to just Blue Skies, and went on to create special effects for movies such as Star Trek Insurrection as well as Fight Club. The first technical animated movie was mainly a CGI demonstration test film known as Bunny. It was produced by Chris Wedge, one of Blue Sky Studios' founders, and released in 1998. It was not designed to draw success, but more or less designed to draw the interest of other companies who worked in the film industry, which subsequently drew the interest of 20th Century Fox, who decided to invest heavily in Blue Sky Studios after selling VIFX, another Fox-related special effects studio. In 2002, Ice Age was unveiled to 20th Century Fox, who saw the imminent movie as a box office bomb and attempted to fire half of the production team before unsuccessfully making an attempt to sell the studio. There's that management issue I was foreshadowing earlier. However, in spite of this, Ice Age was still released in the box office to make up for any potential losses. Yet, against all odds, it would become a resounding success, kickstarting the illustrious studio into action with a box office yield of $380 million. They were going to further this success by releasing Robots, yet another commercial success which grossed roughly $260 million, before deciding to go back on the Ice Age movie they released and was previously considered a failure by the parent and publishing studio. Blue Sky Studios would go on to make Ice Age a franchise by releasing Ice Age Meltdown, which would gross a mind-shattering $667 million at the box office, cementing Ice Age's legacy as one of the most successful franchises inside the animation scene. As if they couldn't become any more successful, they would go on to release Horton Hears a Who, an adaptation of the Dr. Seuss book, which grossed another $380 million. Ice Age Dawn of the Dinosaurs soon followed, which broke another record by yielding $885 million from the box office, as well later debuting a new movie that had become wildly successful. This success was relatively unique considering the fact that it shattered through a border between languages and ended up becoming successful in Brazil. That movie happened to be Rio, of which it grossed almost $500 million. Rio was an exceptional example and perhaps even a cornerstone. It represented Blue Sky's ability to create something new as well as an immersive experience. They were far more than the special effects company that they first were in the 80s and 90s. They were now on their feet, mostly independent whilst creating these wonderful projects. Sure, Ice Age was starting to get a little repetitive and they were faltering when it came to the more original projects, but it seemed as if Rio would mark a turning point for the studio. That things were finally looking up and the future was bright and they didn't have to worry about the repetition. It seemed all was going well for the studio and its creativity department. Surely, releasing another Ice Age movie wouldn't slow their success, right? In July of 2012, Blue Sky Studios released what would become another commercial success in the form of Ice Age Continental Drift. Although it grossed an astronomical $880 million from the worldwide box office, the release of this movie took the Ice Age franchise up to its fourth member, demonstrating an issue that was starting to rip Blue Sky Studios open from the inside. And that happened to be the fact they were seriously lacking in the creativity department. This whole time, they hadn't bothered to experiment with anything else in place of Ice Age, instead going for the easy option and treating Ice Age as the defiant giant that they created initially in 2002. I can understand making sequels to a movie every few years, but this is their fourth Ice Age movie in 10 years, a move that slowly but surely exposed the weaknesses of Blue Sky Studios and the creative team. Furthermore, the writing inside the third Ice Age film felt slightly off, but their fourth movie is what truly broke the camel's back for many, considering the plot featured many convoluted twists and turns, but was also leading nowhere in terms of plot development. Whilst Ice Age 1 and 2, perhaps 3 to a degree, told the definitive story, Ice Age 4 felt more aimless in its development and plot progression, more or less demonstrating that this movie franchise has stooped to the lowest of lows and utilised its recognition from a younger audience to draw in some cheap and easy profits. Financial issues would arise once again for Blue Sky Studios following the release of one of their largest failures yet, Epic. Although it may have succeeded in the grand scheme of things, drawing in a mighty $270 million, the budget for this movie was immensely high, and after marketing, trailers, actors, story writers and other expenses behind the scenes were funded, it left the studio in a bit of a tricky situation. Not only that, a lot of people saw Epic as a rehashing of a typically cliche storytelling format, with the plot being the fact that a teenage girl found herself in a new world, yet the animation was nailed perfectly and most likely covered up the fact that this movie wasn't anything new or original. Following that failure, Blue Sky Studios decided to go back on their old formatting, creating sequels for movies and turning them into franchises. At this point, it was clear that a lot of the creative mind side of the studio had either departed for Illumination, DreamWorks or Pixar, which is now owned by Disney, or they were simply being lazy. I will admit, when it comes to Rio 2, I think out of all the sequels to the movies that Blue Sky could have made, it was arguably their most successful. I would usually fault them for spending a good $130 million on this movie, which again goes to show how the mismanagement of funds was an issue that plagued them. I mean, I can kind of understand, creating something good and also something that's high quality with a lot of funds, but it's a movie about birds. Why does it need $130 million to create? I truly wonder where those funds were really going. On the plus side, it managed to break $500 million, which I guess means that they made a profit from this, but I still do wonder where most of those funds went and how they managed to fall into this financial pit of despair. Speaking of which, that's where Blue Sky's glory starts to take a tumble for the worse. Already recklessly spending money, Blue Sky decided to invest $100 million into their next project, the Peanuts movie. It was known elsewhere as Snoopy and Charlie Brown. It may have racked up $250 million in the box office, but in the grand scheme of things, it was a bomb for Blue Sky considering management costs and such, and they could barely break even. It was quite a success animation-wise as well as writing-wise, but the promotion for this movie was relatively niche in the grand scheme of things. Yet again, it was less of Blue Sky's own creative department that was put in charge of this movie, and it was more or less them being contracted to make a movie for another franchise completely. Don't get me wrong, they did an amazing job with this movie, but it was probably made better thanks to the fact fact that Blue Sky didn't have much interference when it came to the writing department. It's more up to their animators to make this movie work. That has to have been one of Blue Sky's greatest flaws as a studio and what inevitably led to its demise. It was the fact that originality was something that the studio struggled with. I can further this with the fact that the next box office release other than Snoopy and Charlie Brown was Ice Age 5. Ice Age 5! Ice Age Collision Course was its name, and I just wonder how on earth you get to this point as a movie studio where you need to create 5 movies belonging to the same franchise to save your sinking boat. I honestly thought Shrek was bad when its 4th movie came up, but no, Ice Age 5, everybody. One of the first animated movie franchises to have 5 or more entrants in its movie library that surround a major theme. I mean, don't even get me started on some of the marketing for this movie. The advertisements were absolutely horrible. There were posters everywhere, at least where I live, of this godforsaken female version of Sid the Sloth. Here's the movie poster for all of you to see. Yep, this was pretty much everywhere in the United Kingdom for a few months, and you couldn't escape it no matter where you went. It was truly a dark time for Blue Sky, especially when they seemingly had so much promise, but hey, it's Ice Age, right? It's a reliable cash cow that made plenty of money for the studio before, so how badly could it perform at the box office? Everybody hated it. It may have made $400 million, but it underperformed massively, and almost everyone loyal to the Ice Age franchise cast it aside as one of the worst movies ever produced by a movie studio, especially Blue Sky Studios. The plot was unoriginal and unfunny, the writing just didn't exist at all, the plot was super hard to follow, at least, the animation at this stage looked completely outdated and felt that they were shoving these characters down your throat. Like, at the beginning of Ice Age, it was fairly simple, with a few characters exploring the icy wastelands. Then you get into the second one where everything melts and these characters are no longer subjected to enduring an icy wasteland. Seems simple enough, right? So why in the purple hell is there a marriage plot in the 5th movie? Who are all of these new characters? What is their purpose in the grand scheme of things? Blue Sky Studios, what is this mess that you've created out of one of your most beloved franchises? Are you truly that lost to the point where you're putting movie ideas from the recycling bin? That's literally all this movie feels like. Recycled garbage designed to cash in on the fact that Ice Age has been a running franchise for 14 years at this point, and many people have grown up with Ice Age. I mean, I thought Disney's live action of Lion King was bad, but at least that made a ton of money. The worst part is that wasn't even the end of Blue Sky Studios. They still had a bit of money to go ahead and express themselves to see if they were truly worthy of the loyalty they had just lost. So what would their great idea be? What would be the thing that they do to win back the crowd that had just abandoned them? It has to be something great, original, funny, thrilling, thoughtful. Literally anything that wasn't Ice Age. Maybe it could be Rio 3. It was f***ing Ferdinand. I get that they tried with this movie, that they were going for something original for this, and not gonna lie, the animation had improved significantly, but the story writing just wasn't there at all. It was completely absent, so was the point of the plot itself. I wonder why this movie completely bombed at the box office in the grand scheme of things. It felt there was supposed to be a main plot or some sort of main point inside of Ferdinand that would have pulled it together, but instead it was rushed out of the door to make back some money. I think the worst tale about Ferdinand is the fact it's spent $111 million on its own creation. That included marketing, hiring the actors, special effects, new animation equipment, the whole shebang, and it only made back $295 million. Although this number sounds good on paper, the movie creation capacity that Blue Sky had at the time was severely limited, and the fact that they couldn't pull back this much money when they're already struggling with financial problems was gravely concerning for the studio at the time. Not only that, their decision to create something that attempted to prove to the world that they had some sort of creativity left in the tank, only to create something that a lot of people consider as being a shameful creation in comparison to the fun that the Blue Sky Studios was previously known for. This tale just felt empty in comparison. There was no real adventure. It was only a short tale that was blossomed into a movie, which highlighted Ferdinand's attempt at shooting for the stars and for glory. It's safe to say that some people may have liked this movie, some people may even consider it a classic by today's standards, but its lack of ability to really innovate furthered Blue Sky's downfall. Not long after Ferdinand sank in the box office, they made Spies in Disguise, which, this was complete and utter garbage, right from the beginning to the end. This movie had no originality at all, its animation was completely outdated. I'm pretty sure the story writers just went on vacation for this movie. I was this terrible. This literally looked like a f***ing Chinese film studio found the plot that tried to be relatable and to export it to the West, like Spies in Disguise, more like Spies bringing demise, and that demise was the Blue Sky Studio. Studios. Following the complete and utter failure that was this forsaken and unoriginal hellspawn of a creation, 20th Century Fox, struggling with its own internal issues and with financial problems as they just spent $100 million on Spies in Disguise only for it to bomb at the box office once more, was forced to sell itself or auction itself to a titan of a company, a buyer that made it clear they're going to buy up their competition and to cement themselves in a modern era. Blue Sky assumed that this meant more funds so they could hopefully redeem themselves and win back some of their old loyal fan base, but no, their buyer couldn't have been more of a tyrant. At the beginning of 2019, the Walt Disney Corporation announced that as part of their 2019 acquisition of 20th Century Fox, that they'd be taking Blue Sky Studios as their own and setting it up as a subsidiary of their already titanic animation force. This acquisition included in mid-March of 2019, sealing the fate of Blue Sky Studios in stone now that the new overlords held sole power over them as a studio. Although not much has been revealed about how the Walt Disney Corporation handled the acquisition of the studio, it was safe to say that many minds that were lacking inside the studio were slashed from the record books and were promptly fired. What could be described next is nothing short of merciless, considering Disney went on a rampage, slowly but surely draining the studio of whatever talent it had left and presumably repurposing them for Pixar or the successor studio that would come after Blue Sky, which is an animation studio belonging to Fox, which is now owned by Disney. Before the 2020 pandemic, Blue Sky Studios initially had hopes that it would be repurposed to create Rio 3, which was believed to have been greenlit internally by 20th Century Fox before it sold itself to Disney. Yet, Rio 3 never came to fruition, nor did any of its future projects that had pitched to Fox ahead of their acquisition by the Walt Disney Corporation. It was safe to say that the mismanagement of funds as well as previous creative blunders has backed the studio into a corner in which an angry alongside hungry lion in the form of Disney was aiming to gobble them up from the very beginning of their existence. A studio that once created Marine Corps advertisements as well as internal videos for the US Marine Corps had now been cast aside and forsaken, tossed into the wind thanks to these poor decisions. It was Blue Sky's inability to reform and appoint new creative heads whenever time deemed it necessary, alongside their ability to innovate beyond 2010 and to establish new franchises and new movies completely, that killed the studio. Not only did it kill its hope for its past and present, it also killed its hopes for the future. Now, a lot is up for speculation considering not many people that were fired or repurposed from Blue Sky Studio have spoken out against Disney's treatment of them because, well, it's Disney, but it's safe to say that the entire studio was gutted for what it was worth. Blue Sky presumably went into the acquisition agreement thinking that it were going to be under the management of the new Fox that Disney was going to form, but instead that same Fox and Disney, to an extent, decided to completely repurpose the studio staff and to kill it in its entirety. This fate arguably could have been avoided had Blue Sky Studios been more willing to not only listen to critics but also to those who had lesser roles inside of the chain of command. One fatal flaw that I forgot to mention was the fact that producers, story writers, and animation specialists, not to mention producers and advisors, mostly remained static during the time of Blue Sky's existence. Sure, they may have innovated around 10 years before the fourth Ice Age was released, but their inability to appoint new people really reshuffle the management structure was something that hammered a few extra nails into that aforementioned coffin. I think the worst part of their tale of mismanagement was the blunder that the fact there were so many exciting movie ideas that were called off thanks to the assumption that they would fail. You know, the same attitude that Fox had towards Blue Sky up until they released Ice Age. Talk about not learning from your mistakes and the hypocrisy that was followed them dousing the students with ignorance. There was always a belief that in spite of the small size of the studio, they would remain the underdog and it would also make them shy of expanding and become one of the Goliaths, that things would change too much. Regardless, things did inevitably change the moment they released the disaster that would be Ferdinand and later Spies in Disguise. I don't even know how you fall from grace that heavily. If there's one thing that truly stuffed Blue Sky into the coffin, it was the fact that at the time, Illumination was taking over as the primary children's film producer. That's not to spare Blue Sky any mercy or to give them an excuse. The one thing you're supposed to do as an animation studio is to work harder, to compete, and to use some of the funds from your successes to upscale the work that your studio can perform, but instead they mostly embezzled their funds to live in luxury as well as pay their animators much more than other companies to keep them satisfied. Yeah, if I had to wrap everything up in one neat bow and a gift, it would be their inability to evolve that killed Blue Sky Studios. The static processes in which everything was conducted, the fact that other than their innovation with Rio and Epic, there wasn't really any further progress with that animation software. If you truly want to be the top dog of the animation industry, you need to invest more time, resources, and effort into everything. You need lighting artists, storyboard artists, those that can program new features into rendering software, those that can animate efficiently and effectively, story writers, actors, producers, the list goes on. But alas, Blue Sky Studios, a studio once so great, finally fell from grace, and with that, the team mostly shattered into pieces. The studio was declared defunct by Disney on April 10th, 2021. To commemorate the close closing of the studio, the remainder of whatever was left of the team, a group of roughly 6 individuals, got together to animate a scene in which Scrat, the first character to ever appear in Ice Age and their feature films, finally managed to get a hold of his cherished acorn. A scene that, quite frankly, despite the repetition of the Ice Age films, brought my heart to peace. Regardless of how Blue Sky fell as a studio, I will still fondly remember them for the first 2 Ice Age films as well as both Rios. They may have only produced 13 films in total, but each of them, besides Ferdinand and Bison Disguise, shall be passed down by a few who still remember Blue Sky Studios, myself included. It may have been a tragic tale of fate how everything took place, but in the end, it even goes to show that as an underdog, you still need to evolve to keep up with the Titans and Goliaths of the animation world. If anything, this demonstrated what not to do as a movie studio and how to kill a movie studio that was once so great. Anyways, this has been Nadvar speaking about Blue Sky Studios, what made it so great, when disaster began to strike, and what eventually plunged it into its defunct status. If you've got any feedback to leave or any opinions on the matter, I would appreciate if you left it in the comment section below, as I'm always looking to read some new comments as well as learn how to improve further. Thank you all for watching, I hope you have a wonderful day and may the cosmos shine upon you. Bye!